happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment, and never ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats, and they can't skip over the first black woman vice president, the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
And if you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse. And every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime. This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have.
Hey everybody, Congressman Andy Ogles here. Look, this is episode 28 of Restoring the Republic. Now this episode's a little bit different. We're gonna have a couple of guests. I have my dear friend and mentor, Congressman Perry, General Perry. But we have three topics that I wanna touch on. One, we're gonna talk about the crash that happened here in DC at the Potomac. General Perry was a helicopter pilot. I'll let him talk about his background and his perspective. We're going to talk about my bill, the Deep State, or in the Deep State Act, and then we'll talk about USAID or USAID. And so, obviously, the nation was captivated by the event. In fact, I was in the air. I'd just taken off from DC, 20, 30 minutes earlier, and my phone alerted that there had been a crash in DC over the Potomac. And then there's that moment, is this another 9/11? What happened? And there's a lot of uncertainty. Now we know that there was a helicopter and there was a regional jet, a CRJ, a Canadian regional jet, that collided. So with that, really quickly, Congressman Perry, someone I've known from the beginning when I first began to run for Congress. We've become friends. He's been a great friend and mentor, true fighter, both from the perspective of he's a member of the Freedom Caucus, former chairman of the Freedom Caucus, and quite often, like Jordan, one of the larger than life voices of the House Freedom Caucus. And so it's been an honor to serve with you and get to know you. But with that, you said, real quick, Pennsylvania, tell us about your district. It's always competitive, both the primary and the general. They always come after you. Let's start there and we'll jump to the helicopter.
Well, look, I'm pleased to be with Andy Ogles from Tennessee. I hail from Pennsylvania, the 10th district, which includes the capital city of Harrisburg, but also includes the sweetest place on earth, Chocolatetown, USA, Hershey. Just north of Gettysburg, York, the city of York, home of York Barbell and the York Peppermint Patty. And but it's great to be here with my friend Andy Ogles, who also, look, when you stand for things in Washington, D.C., they come after you. And so Andy Ogles is no, he's no stranger to the, hey, Burlison. It's good. Eric Burlison here from Missouri, and he operates on a different schedule than the rest of us do. He's got.
I had to find this building.
For his birthday, we're going to get him a watch. I mean, all right, continue.
Yeah. So anyhow, but it's great to be with Andy Ogles, who is also a person who fights for the things he believes in, and of course, the swamp recoils and comes after him too.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the crash. So, and again, I'll let you speak from experience. You've flown the route, you've flown the helicopter. It seems that they breached their ceiling. They were off track. So tell us what that means.
Well, look, in Washington, D.C., if you drive around here, if you come into town, you'll notice, if you're watching, that there's a plane landing across the river probably about every 60 seconds. And so it's a very high volume traffic area. And of course, we seek to separate aircraft in all circumstances. And in this occasion, There is a low-level route, a day route, and a night route, and you must stay, if you're a helicopter, and you can do this pretty easily, stay below the assigned altitude so that you maintain that vertical separation. And I suspect, we're waiting to see, I'm a member of the Transportation Committee, we're going to get a briefing tomorrow, we're going to go out and see the remains of the crash, but I suspect a couple things have happened. I suspect there were inadequate calls from air traffic control. So when they say, do you see the aircraft? That's not specific enough. Do you see the aircraft at 12 o'clock and a quarter mile is different than do you see the aircraft? Because again, every 60 seconds, one's landing. So when you see one, you got to make sure it's the correct one, because there's another one right behind it, and there was another one right behind that. And so if the pilots acknowledged air traffic control and said, yes, I see the aircraft, which aircraft? ATC needs to be specific. And also, you need to be on your altitude. I suspect we're going to find that the helicopter had breached the ceiling, had flown above the assigned altitude, no vertical separation, flying objects in the same place at the same time. The unfortunate and horrific tragedy results.
And just to clarify, from a layperson's perspective, because you've literally flown the helicopter, you've literally flown the route, is that in that moment there were multiple planes stacked.
Yes.
And that it is presumed that the pilot misidentified the aircraft that was closest.
That's what and you got to remember, if you're looking at an airplane from the side, you're going to see a little red light or a little green light, depending on which side of the aircraft you're on. But if you're facing the aircraft, and it's landing, you're going to see blaring landing lights. But if the aircraft turns, you're not going to see those landing lights. But if there's another aircraft coming on approach, even if it's a mile or two away, those lights are very bright. And you might say, I see the aircraft, you see that one, you don't see this one right in front of you.
Well, so we're not drawing any conclusions, but, again, from someone who's flown the craft, who's flown the route, and that is close to what seems to be coming together. It just needs to be verified. So thank you for that perspective. And quite frankly, an American hero, served in the war, lots of missions, really in the firefight, both here in D.C. but also overseas. And we thank you. And you're a dear friend. And so joining us late, we're going to just point that out again.
Better late than never.
Eric Burlison. But we'll get to Eric in just a moment. So this is for both of you. So I have End the Deep State Act. So if you're paying attention, obviously Donald Trump has done more in just a couple of weeks than Joe Biden, at least constructively, did in an entire 4 years. Now, the damage that Joe Biden has done will take a decade to unwind. And so that's part of our job. And why you see President Trump working at such a breakneck speed, it's executive order, executive order. We went down, we had dinner with the president, and at that time he was talking about a couple of hundred executive orders, and then it ended up being like 325 or whatever. But that being said, it's the pace at which he's working. Again, he's done more in 2 weeks than Joe Biden ever imagined doing. But one of the things he's talking about is Schedule F, which would allow him to fire these embedded bureaucrats, if you're from the South, like a tick on a dog that you just can't get rid of, is that you got to get rid of these things. And we've literally had an employee from the Department of Homeland Security on a hot mic say, now this is a senior level employee, say that they did not like the secretary, they did not like Secretary Noem, and we're going to actively work against her agenda and against President Trump. You know what? That individual needs to have their ass fired. And so with Schedule F, the executive order being in place, he or she would be able to do that. Now, my legislation takes that to the next step. So obviously when the next administration comes in, J.D. Vance, he would leave it in place. But if it's some libtard, they may reverse it. So we're going to work to codify that so it becomes law, and that if you're going to work for the government, you should have to earn it. You should have to be there. So I'll start with you because you have more experience than the two of us. When you think about the bureaucracy, the deep state that quite frankly, and I would say on most days runs this town, what does it mean for Secretary Noem or anyone to be able to just fire folks who aren't doing their jobs or quite frankly subverting our country?
Well, you were an executive at home in your state. Eric, you've got experience in the private sector. I ran a business as well. The president is the executive, so you have to have people in place to execute your job, right? You're the one that's responsible. The people elected the president, and they expect him to do what they asked him to do. Now, to be fair, there are people in the country that don't want Donald Trump to be the president, and they don't want him to do what he set out to do. I get that, and there's probably going to be a time where there's somebody in the presidency that I don't want to be there, and I don't agree with the agenda. But the bigger issue is that we expect the people that elected this guy and to hold him accountable to be able to do his job. He can't do his job if he's got to work with people that refuse to do it, You wouldn't do that in a business that you were running. I was running a family business, and I was paying my employees. I certainly wouldn't keep somebody on the payroll that said, well, see here, I'm not showing up on time. I'm not going to do that work. I'm not doing it the way you want me to, and I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to do it on my terms. And you think, well, what's the point of all of this? I think to have fidelity to the American people and to the vote and who they elected, you must say, if you're going to work here as a policymaker, then you must agree to work for the president or the executive, in this case, Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland. You're supposed to implement her agenda. No one elected you. You're the employee. So, and if you're not willing to do that, that's okay. Then you need to find other work, right? There's a future for you somewhere else, but it's not here, right? And I think that's the principle. And we understand what's good for the goose is going to have to be good for the gander. But so this time it might work out for us, and the next time it might not. But we accept that. We accept that who wins is going to implement their policies. What we don't accept is that who wins can't implement their policies because the person from the last administration never leaves and just keeps implementing their policies.
That's right. So Eric Burlison from Missouri, if you were talking to your constituents back home and you're having a conversation, you say there's employees that are actively undermining the secretaries of the president, what do you think that conversation would be like?
Yeah, especially my district. My district loves Donald Trump, and if there are employees they would call them treasonous, really. If they're not willing to, follow the orders of the executive branch and do, if they're going to undermine his position and his authority, I think that we have people that need to go. They need to be fired. And I think most people understand, like if you work at a job and you're not doing your job, you should be fired. There shouldn't be such a class of people who are impervious to being fired. Only the Supreme Court, right? Outside of that, I don't know that you can make a case. I dismiss the whole idea in higher institutions. That's how we have all these woke universities, because you have professors with tenure, they can't get fired. And the same thing with a bureaucrat. If you can't be fired, then you can't motivate them to even perform.
You might almost say, what's the point of having elections if the same people are going to remain as the implementers perennially and never, what's the point of it, right?
Well, and that's one of the things that I think people back home need to understand is that obviously we seek re-election. We as elected officials come and go, but some of these employees have been here 10, 20, 30 years. They don't plan on going anywhere.
Some of these members have been here 20 years.
Well, we talk about term limits for members of Congress, fine. President's term limited, but we never talk about term limits for the bureaucracy, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. So let's jump. So obviously you have Doge out there. The left is freaking out over Elon Musk. Homeland Security hearing today. It was about cybersecurity and the threat and creating a pipeline for the workers that we need. There's 500,000 unfilled cyber jobs in the country. Mm-hmm. That's as large as our standing army, just to give you perspective. And all they want to talk about, not the threat of China, not DeepSeek, not the pipeline. They want to talk about Elon Musk. So that's how woke and just, distracted they are, for better or worse. But let's talk about USAID for a moment. So obviously, I would say they spend a lot of money to subvert our interests. But here's $1.5 million to advance diversity and equity in Serbia, because that's in our best interest here in the United States. $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland. And again, I'm sure people back home in your district or in Hershey really care about a musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Columbia, not Columbia, Tennessee, but Columbia, the country. $32,000 for transgender comic books in Peru. So this is an agency that should be representing our country and our interests overseas. And what are they doing? They're funding media that talks bad about us, and then they're doing all this woke nonsense. So Doge just come out, talked about defunding. We've started with Perry. Let's start with you. What are your thoughts on USAID? What should we do with them? What are your thoughts on Elon Musk, and where do we go from here?
I think it's awesome. This is like the first time I've ever been like had any hope whatsoever that we might be able to turn this country around. These first 2 years that you and I were here, I would go home and I would say, "There's no hope. I have no hope in this Congress." In this place, I think it's a lost cause. Then Trump comes in and does this, and I suddenly have hope.
Well, to your point, like, so I was just in a classified briefing, so you can't have your phone or any technological devices in there. And the first thing I did when I got my phone back wasn't to see what my messages are, to see what my staff. I wanted to see what Trump had done in the last hour, because he's been so dadgum busy,
things.
Right? And again, what was the left's reaction to it? So he just signed another executive order banning men
in women's
from
sports.
women's sports.
Hey, and I noticed in that executive order, he had all of these girls that, these athletes come and stand around him as he was signing it. And you know what? He passed. He didn't sniff one girl's hair.
I didn't say it, you did.
I'm not getting into that.
Well, so General Perry, what's your thoughts? I mean, again, you worked in the military. You have some familiarity with the agency.
Yeah.
Does it need to exist, or do we just...
So I've been on the Foreign Affairs Committee since I've been here, and we've dealt with the United States Agency for International Development. And we understand we have to compete with China and adversaries that also play in places like Africa or developing nations and so on and so forth. We get it, and we want American influence to be out there. International development, the things that you outline, and that's just a small smattering. We've been fighting this forever in this committee and cannot get them to stop spending on things that actually our allies don't want. But our friends don't want and so what the administrations have done is said, if you want American influence, if you want American money, you must do this culturally in your country. And these countries say, but this culturally doesn't work in our country. Oh, too bad. And so what you really got to wonder is, how does this further how does this benefit America to do this in these countries? How does taking your tax dollars and have a transgender comic book promoted in some other country that's primarily and predominantly a heavily Christian country? How does that service America and Americans' needs? Of course, it doesn't. It's gotten way out of hand, and this is the first time that a lot of us have been screaming from the mountaintops about this, but it never gets any press. But when Doge goes in to do it, American people see the curtain is pulled.
Eli had the amendment. Eli had the amendment for this.
Right.
Well, and General, I know you have a media hit that you have to get to, so thank you for being here. Eric and I will finish the conversation.
So I'll leave early since he came late.
There you go.
Thank you, my friend.
Well, I had to do it.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you all. Hey, keep supporting Andy Ogles from Tennessee, right? All right.
Well, and so as you watch Doge, as you hear the conversation about Elon Musk, I mean, these are the types of things that members of Congress, especially those on the right, have been talking about. Is, we have an open border. Waste is out of control. We know that. Fraud is out of control. We know that. Spending in general is out of control, but then no one's willing to do anything about it. And then suddenly you have this Doge committee that's propped up. Elon Musk says, I'll be your Huckleberry. I'll dive into this project. Mm-hmm. I'll get the whiz kids or whoever we need to assemble a team to get in there and get it done. And so now they're producing results, real results. They're cutting all of these contracts, DEI, all this woke nonsense. And, they're, I don't know, $1.5 billion, $2 billion in savings. Don't quote me on that number. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but it's savings after savings at a time when we have to cut spending. So as we close out, and we'll let you guys go here in just a moment, is what are your hopes for Elon and the Doge committee? And if you said there's one thing I want them to take a look at, what would it be?
I think that all of the fraud in Medicaid, there's a ton of waste in our healthcare system and the way in which our healthcare system works. That's where most of the money and the waste is in America, and where it's growing. And so, if they're going to tackle something, I would hope that would be the subject matter that we discuss.
And to your point, we're not talking about cutting benefits. We're simply saying let's find the areas of fraud,
Right.
because at the end of the day, you and I pay for that. So if you can cut out the waste, if you can cut out the fraud, and suddenly that money is going back into the system where you're getting better outcomes, that's a win for everybody, right?
Yeah, it should be.
Well, thank you for General Perry, who had to go. Thank you to Eric Burlison from Missouri, my good friend. We came in together. And with that, this is Andy Ogles. Look, God bless. Buckle up, Buttercup. Trump's not done. There's more to come. Our enemies are paying attention. Our allies are paying attention. The border is closing. The encounters at the border are drastically down. And America is safer today because of President Donald Trump. I'm Andy Ogles from the 5th Congressional District, and this is Restoring the Republic. God bless.
If you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment. And never ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats, and they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history. Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
And if you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment. And never ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats, and they can't